and an opportunity to talk about race, to talk about this very important conversation, and give you guys a safe space to communicate and come up with some great ideas to solve some of the issues that we have. I'm going to introduce our speaker, Brandon Gridiron, who serves as the Administrator of Equity and Student Services for Visalia Unified School District. His role, he is responsible for ensuring the staff, students, and families of Visalia Unified to receive the necessary support to ensure that all students reach their full academic and social potential and are successfully prepared for college, career, and life success. Mr. Gridiron earned his master's degree in counseling, student services, and administrative credential in educational leadership from Fresno State, where he is enrolled in the doctoral program in education and leadership. Without further ado, I introduce to you our moderator, Brandon Gridiron.
Thank you, Kalene, for a kind introduction. Definitely appreciate it. And good afternoon, everyone. It is an honor to serve as the moderator for today's discussion. And I would like to thank you all for joining us this afternoon. At this time, I would like to have our student panelists take a few minutes just to introduce themselves before we get into our discussion. So any of our student panelists who want to start, just introduce your name and what school or affiliation you represent.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and go first. Hello, everyone. My name is Anthony. I am from the North Fork Mono tribe, one of the original peoples of what's considered the Central Valley today. I graduated from Fresno State with a bachelor's in sociology and American Indian Studies, and but I plan to return to Fresno State in the fall to get my master's in education. So it's good to be here. You know, I'm honored to be speaking with fellow youth, fellow students. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Anthony.
I can go next. My name is Elizabeth Rocha Zuniga. I currently am a senior at Fresno State. I'll be graduating this semester with a double major in political science and Chicano Latin American studies. And I'll be going to law school in the fall semester. And I identify as a Chicana. And thank you all so much for having me here. I look forward to this amazing conversation.
I'll go next. My name is Odessa Marcos. I'm a student, a high school junior in Visalia, and I plan on going to college as soon as I graduate high school. I identify as Black and Hispanic, and it's really great to be here and see everybody.
My name's Ayanna. I'm a high school senior, and the cultural identity that I identify with is African American and Hispanic.
Hi there, everyone. My name is Belle Vang. I'm a recent alumna of Fresno State. I'm double majoring in business marketing and public relations and minoring in women's studies, philanthropy, and Asian American studies. I mentioned I'm a previous student of Fresno State. I'm glad to be here today. Thank you.
And thank you all. Thank you all for participating in such an important conversation. I just want to make sure that everyone had an opportunity to introduce themselves before we get into our discussion today. I believe we did. So I would like to start off a little bit by providing some context. Often the conversation related to race and racism is dismissed and sometimes even ignored. And I would contend that this is because there's not a shared understanding of what we're talking about when we discuss race and racism. So before we get into our dialogue, I think it's important that we set the stage by establishing common language as to what we're talking about when we discuss race and racism. Race is referred to as a social constructed meaning attached to a variety of physical attributes, including but not limited to skin and eye color, hair texture, and bone structure of people in the United States and elsewhere. Racism, generically speaking, can be defined as beliefs and enactment of beliefs that one set of characteristics is superior and inferior to another set. Over the last year, we have witnessed and experienced the impacts of race and racism in America, from senseless acts resulting in the tragic loss of life to hate-motivated acts of violence and the continuous refusal to believe that racism is still a problem in America. However, we have also witnessed the power of voice and what can happen when we are willing to use our voice to speak up for what matters. Our goal today is to uplift youth voice on the impact of racism and how they seek to address this critical issue. So we have 4 questions that we'll be asking our panelists. Then we will leave time for questions from the audience. For those of you who are watching and joining us this afternoon, please remember to text your questions in the chat because we will review those questions and have opportunities for our panelists to answer those questions as well. So let's go ahead and get started. We ask that during our discussion today that we engage in conversation truthfully, we speak our truth respectfully, and that we understand the importance of civil discourse and have engaging conversations, but also acknowledge the fact that we are sharing from our own experiences. So oftentimes I would like to say that we lead with love. We listen to others and their perspective. We open our hearts and minds. We value perspectives, and we empathize and encourage and empower others to do the same. So without further ado, let's jump into our first question. And most of you had an opportunity to introduce yourselves and share your cultural identity. So our question to you all now is, share your experiences of discrimination on the basis of race, ethnicities in schools, and specifically in public in the life in the Central Valley. So anyone can start answering the question as they see fit.
I can start. I'm still in high school, and I started school, young like everybody else, and I live in Visalia, which is I don't know if a lot of people here are from Visalia, but it's a predominantly white area. And one thing that I've noticed as a Black person in public schools is that there's this stigma around race, and it's very uncomfortable for a lot of people to talk about because a lot of the people here grew up here, and they've grown up here with a small Black population. So this conversation really hasn't been had because it hasn't really needed to be had. So I noticed that a lot of my peers are really uncomfortable talking about race, and a lot of the times my teachers will avoid talking about race because they don't want to offend, and they don't, they know that this is a point that they are not very knowledgeable about, and so they just think it's smarter to ignore the topic. I think that this is just as harmful, if not more harmful, than direct hate, because direct hate is very in your face. It's hard to ignore it, and a lot of the times, as humans, we naturally want to oppose things like that. But when disrespect is used as a joke or as something that is just used as like banter in a group and everybody else laughs, and maybe you're the only person not laughing, it's a lot easier for us to let those kinds of things slide because our need to be social and our need to have friends kicks in because we are humans. Excommunication for voicing your opinions, especially in school, just like in elementary school, I noticed this a lot. Like, for example, I was joking around with one of my friends. One time I was in 5th grade. We were all in 5th grade in our classrooms and our little desks. And I had accidentally made one of my friends angry. And so he started to draw a little picture. And when he held up this portrait of me, it was just a circle with like a black crayon, like smudged all over it. And everybody laughed. And I was like, okay, the first thing that went to my mind was not, I'm offended, I'm angry. It was, if I don't laugh right now, none of these people are going to want to be my friend anymore. So a lot of the time, students of color have to choose between whether or not they want to be respected or whether or not they want to have friends. So I think that that's probably my biggest experience with racism in public schools and in Central Valley life in general.
Thank you so much, Odessa. Anyone else would like to elaborate on or share their experience?
I can go. I definitely agree with what it just said. I think more often than not, we really do not talk about race or racism to the detail that we must be talking about race and racism. I think that we need to be able to have these conversations in order to really truly understand and be empathetic to those around us. And I say that because I never really paid attention to what I was going through as a Chicana in America and what my experiences really meant until I got to college. That was the first time I even started learning about my community in my classes. And the experience that I wanted to talk about was the one that I had my freshman year in college that really just kind of broke me down and just really made me realize that racism is so alive and real here at even my campus. So my freshman year, I had a roommate who I thought was like my friend. You know, we would do everything together with all of my other roommates, and I never really talked about this at all. So it's like my first time really talking about this experience that I've had. So I apologize if I do not make clear sense, but so this roommate that I had, she was always very, very kind. She would make some remarks about some of the people who worked in our dining hall. They were predominantly Mexican women. And this individual would oftentimes make fun of them and say, oh, well, it's their job to clean out, like to clean our table, so it doesn't matter how it looks like, and just, you know, say some things that I was kind of just turned off about. And it wasn't until my second semester where she made a comment about how Mexicans are the only people who partake with substance abuse. And that just really threw me off because I did not know how to react. And this was during our dinner together. And I was the only person of color at the table. So that experience, I just really did not know what to do. I froze. It was a moment for me to just really try to understand like what I should be doing right now. It was very eye-opening. And the person just continued to just talk about my community in a way that I have never really heard someone talk in such confidence and such just really passionate about this idea that my people are the only people that partake in substance abuse. So it just really made me uncomfortable. And so I remember going back to my dorm and my roommates talked to her about it. And I was there, and, you know, it was kind of this kind of idea back to what was said by Odessa about, you know, this is where I'm from. So like, there's only to talk about this. Like, it's not that big of a deal because this is how I was raised type of mentality to think this way about this population. And so I was just kind of taken aback, and I remember I started crying. I just really did not understand like how someone can think so badly about my community. And it was just a very eye-opening experience that I had. But I know that, you know, I hope that that experience also helped to realize that it's wrong to discriminate and to generalize the whole population. But that was one experience that I still think about and still use in my everyday life to really understand what people think the way that they do about certain individuals, which is wrong. So that was something that I experienced my freshman year here at Fresno State with one of my roommates. But it was just something that I really it still affects me to this day, but totally made me stronger. So.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Anyone else? Anthony, Bella?
Yeah, I'd like to share my experience next. I just want to say thank you for sharing that experience, especially since you have not done it before, Elizabeth. I really appreciate that. And yeah, I definitely encountered that too, where people will just generalize my entire community. I'm like, I have no idea where you heard that from. And you know, living in your community is very different than observing another community as well. I grew up in Clovis, so like just like Odessa, that's a really like white area, right? And nothing wrong with white area, but definitely you'll face things that you won't face in people of color communities. I went in Clovis most of my life, and then I graduated from Central, so I moved to Fresno District 3. And yeah, it changed my life because I was like, wow, I see people that look like me that are bigger than like those little cliques that you see of people of color when you go to Clovis schools, right? And I just remember growing up in Clovis, like when I first started understanding the concept of what a model minority is, which probably is what sets me apart from most of your experiences, unfortunately. A model minority was a coined term by a white man after the Japanese internment, and the Japanese community was able to bounce back from it immediately. And basically they call them the model minority because we're also part of a minority too. A lot of people don't recognize that the Asian community is also a community of color. If y'all haven't heard, Washington recently passed this, I don't know if it was a bill, but he recently passed this thing where now Asian people can be identified as white people. So it'll be white/Asian, and then the rest are people of color, which is totally bizarre and inaccurate because it dismisses our entire experience. And growing up in education as part of model minority, you look at me as an Asian, and I remember being surrounded by white kids and saying like, oh, well, you don't automatically understand algebra, like you're not already good at math. And that also puts in the stereotype of positive stereotypes, right? And there's no such thing as positive stereotype because have you ever been an Asian who sucks at math and everyone's like, well, how come you don't understand it? You're Asian, supposed to get it right away. And that's not how it works. And it's like the most frustrating thing. And it wasn't until college where I realized that, I'm at school because I want to learn. Like that's my passion. I want to like educate myself and educate others. I'm not immediately supposed to know what's going on once I step into the classroom. Like I don't go to class to already know all the topics, right? And if I do, like I obviously shouldn't be in that class because I'm at school to learn. And so being a part of college, although I understand college is not the path for everyone, really opened my eyes and taught me a healthy way to learn rather than already knowing before I step into the classroom. And I remember in high school when I was in AP Calc, everyone's like, wow, Belle, like you don't understand what's going on. And I felt so depressed when I went home that I just did not want to do the homework. I didn't want to do anything. And I had the lowest grade in my class and all my other Asian friends were excelling. And I was like, okay, I'm Asian. I'm supposed to have my stuff together. I'm supposed to know what I'm doing. And it's just so frustrating too, because being part of a minority, that term is built on East Asians. So Japanese, Korean, Chinese, and not to stereotype anyone, that's unacceptable, but I'm Southeast Asian. So I'm part of the Hmong community. And it's also important to recognize the differences under the term of AAPI, which is an inappropriate term in itself. It should just be Asian because Pacific Islanders are a separate group. But being Southeast Asian, a lot of us are first generation. I know a lot of people who are my age who were born in Thailand and Laos and they came here as children. So it's really important to recognize that being first gen also comes with its stigmas. And if I had not attended college and not met other professors who were first generation scholars, I feel like I would never have continued my education. I would not be interested in pursuing graduate school. And it's essential that you meet people who are like you and it really encourages you to succeed. And that's something that I was definitely blessed with, but I know some people are deterred from education because they are not provided those resources.
Thank you so much for sharing. And Anthony, you would like to share next?
Yeah, definitely as a young Native man coming up in these Western schools, I've had to deal with a lot of people's racism throughout the years. Like many Native young men with and boys who wear their hair long, I also have long hair, and just like them, you get a lot of heat in school from the people like Odessa, people who are supposed to be your friends, talking stuff about you because you have your long hair, when they don't realize, it's part of my cultural identity as a person who's native to this land. And I like what Belle was saying about the API term not being appropriate. Terms like Native American and American Indian are also not appropriate. I had another friend of mine tell me that I shouldn't call myself American Indian. I should say that I'm Native American because of Christopher Columbus. And he went on this whole rant about how I should, culturally identify myself, but I'm not Native American. I'm not American Indian. I'm not any of those. I'm Noom. That's the traditional way to say, my tribe, North Fork Mono. I'm Noom. And so it's you get a lot of hate and a lot of misplaced ideas of what Native people should be and should look like, especially because I'm lighter skinned because I'm mixed also. So again, a lot of my friends would say that, oh well, you don't look Indian, you don't look Native, but being Noom or being from any tribe in this nation, it's more to do with your culture, not the way you look, you know. And so I've had to deal with a lot of struggles, you know, from like Odessa and Belle were saying, from people who are supposed to be your friends, you know, and it all stems back to the lack of knowledge about Native peoples, you know, Native tribes in this nation, and it's not just my tribe; it's all tribes, and it's not just me; it's all Native students, you know, who are going through this struggle.
Thanks for sharing, Anthony. I definitely appreciate your perspective on that. It's very important. And it's in the chat, Dr. Morris mentioned us recognizing culture and ethnicity rather than race. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we get into our discussion. Ayanna, would you like to share your experience?
Yes, an experience that I had, and I just want to highlight what Elizabeth was saying, because as a kid, I was, you know, one of the kids who were like, racism doesn't happen. It, you know, that's a thing of the past. And then I got to a freshman in high school and I was like, it's not a thing in the past. So when she said eye-opening experience, it hit home for me because I was a freshman, and one of the things that I dealt with was I had a discriminatory teacher, and it was just a really bad experience too. It got to a point where I wasn't allowed to be in the class. Her students of color were in a designated part of her classroom. Um, there's like an atlas notebook, and the teacher would write really, you know, stereotypes: aggressive, talks back, rude, doesn't do their work. And it was just really, it wasn't really the high school freshman welcome that any kid deserves or should go through. And dealing with racism is very hard, and it really took away like any sense of belonging, like maybe I'm not supposed to be here, or, you know, makes me second guess my character. And like dealing with racism in public, like I get a lot of like what are you doing here? Like you're not supposed to be here, talking about maybe in this area or things like that. So it's kind of fearful if you think about it, because it really, that experience made me always want to watch my back or having to check myself. Um, Being scared that I'm gonna do something to the other person to make them, in a way, be scared of me, or, you know, make me feel like I'm not supposed to be somewhere where I absolutely have the right to be. And so those are my experiences of racism in schools and in public, you know, areas. And it definitely made me stronger. It definitely made me realize the problems and not just dismiss it. So I hate that it happened to me, but I'm glad that it happened to me, because I wouldn't have the ability to advocate for others like I do now. And that's it.
Thank you so much. And all of what you all are talking about reminds me of so many different things. You know, Odessa hit on and Belle hit on a little bit about the need or the desire to assimilate because of the pressures around you and the perceptions and the stereotypes that are created. So therefore, because you may be the only person in this space that identify as this culture, and not drawing attention to yourself by confronting the stereotypes, the narratives, you just kind of sit in that space, right? And it's this idea that I always run into, and even as a kid growing up, when I was experiencing school, I'm pushing back against those things, but struggling. So therefore, I don't even want to confront them. I remember denying my Black identity as a young boy and telling people that I was brown because I knew colors of crayons, and I can look at a crayon and say, I'm not Black like this crayon. But what I recognized in that moment was it was me pushing against the negative stereotypes that were going to come as you calling me black as this crayon, right? The jokes and all those different things. And so me not owning up to and accepting my identity also was a result of the lack of understanding who I was as a young black man, not having opportunities to see myself in text and to see myself in books and to know about my history as my people. And then as I got older and began to learn about the brilliance and the great things that we did as a people, I got to accept and appreciate. And then I embraced what it meant to be black. Those jokes did not become, they were no longer jokes to me, right? I dismissed all of them. And so the power that I hear in the youth and your voices right now is embracing, embracing your cultural identity, embracing who you are, and being able to share that with other people. So that way you can shatter the stereotypes by acknowledging who you are and not having to fit into what they want you to fit into or whatever anybody wants you to fit into. So thank you so much for sharing those stories. I definitely want to jump into our conversation, and there's a two-part question here, right? So as we're thinking about what changes we should make in our school and communities. So we're thinking about school, the schools that we attend, the schools that we've attended or will be attending, right? And our communities that we live in, or the communities around us. What changes do we see that needs to be made? And how should we create more experiences for belonging, or what experiences have you seen that has made that school, that community where you felt like you belonged? So changes, and how can we create more belonging within our communities for different groups of people? And anyone can jump in. Go ahead, Anthony.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start. So as I mentioned earlier, I went to Fresno State, and I was fortunate enough to have the best professors at the sociology department who were very supportive of my research and the work that I do, that I was doing at the university. And I wish we had that same type of support from administrators. Like I said, I'm thankful for the professors that I had at, in my sociology classes, but usually when I would try to get some type of support from the higher ups, it was, it was like talking to a brick wall. They didn't want to hear it, and that says a lot about, administrative work, and, are they really as close to the students as they say they are? The answer is no. So it's a lot of issues like that happened, in all universities, but the times that I really felt belonged were in those sociology classrooms with those professors, because they do love and care about their students, and they do support them in the work that they're doing. So that was great. But what really helped me graduate was the American Indian Studies ambassador program. So I was an American Indian ambassador for Fresno State, and it was a mentoring program with Dr. Lee Oliver. She's the director of American Indian Studies, and so she would help us, present at conferences and hold gatherings and meet once a month to talk and gather and as a community, those moments, those days where I was with, I call them my brothers and sisters, because we're all, indigenous to this land. We're all from different tribes though, but we still have that connection as indigenous people. And it was in those days that I felt I belonged the most, in a school, at this university, in higher education, because these were my role models, these were my mentors, these were my people here with me, we all supported each other in those spaces. So that's what's necessary for change, is to have those professors who support and understand students of color, and respect and make an effort to learn about their lived experiences and how they can apply that to the classroom, how they can apply that into their teaching skills. And also looking into a a curriculum that incorporates, you know, I'm speaking from the indigenous perspective, incorporates native languages, history, and you know, the connection and relationship to the land. Like Brandon was saying, you know, you look at these textbooks, there's nothing that, or I wouldn't say nothing, I'll give them a little bit of credit. There's very little information about, you know, our people's history, you know, and I say that, you know, Black history, Native history, Hmong history. There's very little information about, you know, our people in these textbooks, and that needs a change. You know, there needs to be representation, there needs to be inclusion, and yeah, that's where the change starts, is by decolonizing this Western Eurocentric whitewashed curriculum that our students are learning.
Thank you, Anthony. I appreciate your perspective. I mean, there's so many times that we take for granted the experiences of our youth, and then allowing them to draw upon or help us make change based on their perspective and their experience. So thank you for sharing that. Elizabeth, you want to jump in next?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. I just want to agree with what Anthony said, the importance of curriculum. It's crucial to have these conversations, but to also create a space where folks are able to really understand and learn, and kind of listen to those people who they're learning about. I think that's what we need to really do in education. And one thing that I think is the right way to address that is, currently we do have a bill, AB 1460, the Ethnic Studies bill, that will implement a course in higher education. I think that's what we need to be doing. We need to be engaging with a curriculum, but also engaging in ways to include students in the conversations. And I say that because I do work closely with admin, and I see that we need to have more students involved in these conversations. So I think that having more open spaces for individuals from communities, have a seat at the table, I think that's what we need. We need to really be inclusive and also live up to what our pillars are. One being diversity at Fresno State. I think that's what we need to really actually encompass as universities across the country, really live up to what we say we are doing. And that's something that I really fully stand by. Additionally, I wanted to add places where I felt like I belonged. I do have a great mentor in the Chicano Studies Department, Dr. Macias. He has been such a great mentor for me. I cried in his office before due to several occasions, but I think it's faculty members like that really make a difference, and really showing students that they belong in these spaces, because I feel like I did not belong in the spaces after my experience my freshman year of college. You know, I could have just dropped out, but I wanted to feel like I wanted to defy what she was saying, but I wanted to also believe in myself that I belonged in these spaces. And so having that mentor and being a part of organizations on campus that were with people like me, that really made me feel like I belonged on campus. And two that I want to just briefly mention was the Education Opportunity Program, EOP. They definitely made me feel like I belonged on campus. Just being able to talk to my advisors, but also the students in the organization. We were all coming from the same backgrounds. So that was something that I just felt like I belonged. I belonged in college. And then MECHA, which is El Movimiento Estudiantil Chicanx Aslan. That organization just really made me feel empowered and ready to tackle the world. As Chicanos, we're part of the organization, and we fight for unity and empowerment in our communities, and political action. And I think that's where I was able to feel, I don't know, at home. I feel like at home through MECHA, and having the support from my colleagues through that club, that really helped me really find myself and really see what my potential is as a Chicana woman. And so that's something that I really just embrace about Fresno State, but also about the students there, and the amazing faculty that I have had that have been there for me when I needed someone to be there. So that's a little bit about that.
Thank you. Odessa, you want to jump in and share with us your perspective on what schools in our communities can do to, bring about change, and then also, the sense of belonging within our schools, maybe experiences you've had.
I'm gonna answer these like a little bit flip-flop. So first I'm gonna talk about like the whole sense of belonging thing. This question was a little bit difficult for me to answer. It really forced me to kind of like reflect on all of the groups that I've been a part of, like the sports teams, the social groups, and different places that I've lived, and it kind of forced me to really like reflect, and I'm like, did I really feel like I belonged there? I'm half Black and half Mexican, and my mother grew up very white. She didn't even know she was Hispanic until she was like in middle school. And my father immigrated here from Africa after he was an adult. And so I didn't really have a lot of Hispanic culture, and I didn't have a lot of African culture because I was born in the United States. And then I didn't have any African American culture because my dad wasn't born in the United States. So I was just confused. And so my father served in the US military for 20 years. So I grew up in a military family too, around a lot of very, military people. And so I was very distraught for a while. I was like, I don't know where I belong. I don't know what kind of community I belong in. And then on top of that, I played water polo. Like, there are no Black people that do water polo. I did like competition dance. My brother and I were the only people of color that was on that dance team. We grew up in completely suburban white neighborhoods. My brother and I have always been the only Black people on our block for like 2 miles. Like, we were just so confused. And so I recently found out, probably like when I turned 16, like maybe a year ago, that these kinds of conversations are where I feel like I belong. Like, when I tell you guys about my experiences, and then you guys are like, oh yes, that is, you guys validate me. You guys are like, it's very affirming to me. And so this is, the very specific place with people that are, interested in the same things as me. And, a lot of you guys don't look anything like me, but I still feel like I belong with you guys. So I want to say thank you. And then I think that what Mr. Gridiron was saying about how he was denying his race and that kind of thing, I went through that whole thing too, which was a mess. And then I think that what we need in schools right now is to have these conversations. We need like a program or something, maybe, a program that kind of helps teachers implement these kinds of conversations in classrooms. Because if I were to go into, like a high school classroom, like my history class or something, and be like, guys, let's talk about race, they would freak out. They'd be really uncomfortable. And I think that we really need to completely just take away the stigma from race related topics. It's an uncomfortable topic. I want to take away what's uncomfortable about it. I don't want people to be afraid of offending me when they ask me a question. I want them to be able to ask a question and leave a little bit more educated so that they don't go and offend somebody else in the future. I want these conversations in our schools, and that's where they need to be had the most, because I've never had a conversation like this with, like people that I really go to school with. We have to go outside of school hours to have these conversations. So I want to make sure that we include everybody on these kinds of conversations, mainly in schools, so that we don't have to like go find a completely different group in order to, find people that are interested in the same things as we are.
Thank you so much, Odessa. And I'm, man, you make me proud just as being a native to Visalia and a student in Visalia. I mean, because these are the type of leaders that we want. Uplifting youth voice, right? And my acronym for voice is valuing our individual commitment to equity. And, as each of us in our spaces and youth led, I mean, we have some of the greatest people in our country who started at such a young age. And as I look back, I remember being a kid in school who found my voice in high school, right? And they couldn't stop me from talking at that point, but it led to so many other different things. And so having this opportunity for you guys to be able to share that and creating spaces within schools for you guys to find that voice is so important. Ayanna, you want to share your experience as a high school student, senior, and maybe what we can do in our school districts to continue to create that sense of belonging and change in our communities and schools?
Yeah, I want to say that this year I've participated in a lot of various youth-led voice groups, and they have also had a lot to do with feeling a sense of belonging, because I was just always a kid that would be in class and think about things that are like wrong. Like if I see a teacher embarrass another student, I will be like, they're not supposed to do that. And then I would feel weird because I'd feel like, other kids my age are trying to hang out with their friends and they're trying to do their schoolwork. And I'm just thinking about what's going on around me. I'll just be like, why are you thinking like that? But participating in the youth led voice groups, and you get with these group of peers that are your age or younger, and they're thinking like you, and they're like, hey, I've been through this, or this is something that happens in schools and it's not supposed to. That gives me a sense of belonging, because I feel like there are other people that think like me, and it's just a nice feeling. It feels like I'm not, a weird person like thinking way too much about something. And I really appreciate those youth-led groups, because some of the changes we said we wanted to see, I've seen change, and it just makes me feel proud because I know it'll be better for the next batch of kids who come in and are doing their school things. But another experience that I had where I felt like I belonged was I went to Pride, and I'm not sure if it was 2018 or 2019, but it was fresh off of my experience with dealing with racism in school. And it was just nice to see like, you have your persons of colors, you have white counterparts, you have straight allies, you have LGBT, communities, and if they're all in the melting pot, just enjoying and, feeling like safe, like nothing, not having that fear that something bad is going to happen here. But it was just like a nice experience where I was like, well, this environment doesn't feel hateful. It feels like really good. Like people can come together and they can just enjoy themselves, and it doesn't have to, be blocked with racism and discriminatory behavior. And it was just a nice experience. And that's my good experience and youth group student, my bad. Student-led voice groups do help me feel like I belong, and I feel like more of those and letting more students voice how they feel and what they want to see change is also something that we should continue to make more of.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much, and I definitely agree. Belle, what's your thought about this conversation?
Thank you. I really love the conversation that's going on. I think it's so important. Regarding like school system, I'm going to talk in the perspective of K through 12. I think we should just completely flip it upside down, just get rid of it and restart from the bottom up. I resonate so much with what Anthony said. Like, our textbooks only talk about colonialism and the success of it. And it's like I didn't realize until college when I met Dr. Lee Oliver, who Anthony mentioned. She's incredible. And like we were talking about it, and I never realized that the Trail of Tears was a genocide. Like I literally thought it was like a short walk, and that's bizarre that they would highlight it that way, and it's so unacceptable. And like missionaries, we need to get rid of those trips. We need to just completely like reform the entire education system. As much as I enjoyed my education, my K-12 education, as an adult, I realized how corrupt it was and how much it brainwashed me to believe like, I'm proud to be part of a minority, which I totally am not, and that sexism is okay. And those are intersectional identities where I face racism and sexism within this public school education system. And again, as much as I enjoyed my education, I realized like how corrupt it was and how they really push this idea of like hustling is success. I really appreciate that all the youth on this chat like have emphasized that, it's so important to have a space for you to grow, a healthy space for you to grow. Because again, like being Asian, I feel like like failure was not an option, not because of my parents, but because of the way society has shaped me to be, that, you know, you need to already know as an Asian community member. But I really wish that the public education system would have provided me the opportunity to practice critical thinking, to practice failure and learn from your mistakes to increase your success, and to understand like soft skills, like how to speak and how to encourage one another by learning that compassion. Because hustle is not always the only way that you can use to succeed. Also, I mentioned that I'm Hmong. I really wish that they would have taught more about local history as well, because a lot of people don't know. I didn't find out until this week that when Fresno was founded, a third of it was Chinese because of the railroads that were being built by the Chinese community. And you don't hear about that in history. And it's crazy too, because a lot of the Asians that live in America, they are like the fourth, fifth generation. They aren't just new immigrants or refugees. They've been in America for a long time. So local news like that's just as crucial as national news as well. Also, because I'm Hmong, like it's bizarre that I'll go to Clovis and they'll offer languages like French and German, but they don't offer Hmong as a basic foreign language, because Fresno is one of the largest Hmong communities in the nation. And like it's a place where you see Hmong people, where people know what Hmong is. Whereas you go to LA and be like, oh, I'm Hmong, and people are like, I don't know what that is. Or you go to San Francisco, people don't know what Hmong is. So why are we offering these languages that aren't necessarily serving a good portion of our community, but we can't offer something as basic as Hmong? That's because Asian is not essential, not considered essential or a root within our community, even though again, Fresno is found by a third of the Chinese community. Also, like even when I talk about the higher education system at Fresno State, I feel like they do their best, and I love my education. I'm like super like education focused. It's my passion. I really want to encourage everyone to go to higher ed if you feel it's a path for you. But Fresno State itself, like 10% of, I believe like 10 to 15% of the students are Hmong, but the only thing that we have to symbolize it is the bandao, which is a story cloth that's in the USU. And even now the USU has been closed due to the pandemic, so you can't even see it. Like, why don't we have symbolism of the Hmong community within Fresno State and public school education system? You'll see the General Ving Pao elementary school, when he passed away, they named it after him, but there are no Hmong faculty or staff. You'll walk in, you'll see a white lady, all the professors are white, they're not even people of color. So it's like we need to spread our awareness and knowledge about these experiences. A place I really thought I belonged though was unfortunately not until college. I've always been very aware that I'm Hmong, and I've always been very proud, but I never really got to exude that experience until I went to college. And it wasn't even in education as well. Like I saw this opportunity online through a 501c3, a CBO called Hmong Innovating Politics. And they were relatively new. They're still pretty new. They're like about 5 years old here in Fresno now. They're a branch from Sacramento. I remember attending them and meeting so many youth. And being Hmong, I'm sure like a lot of people of color can resonate this with being Hmong, you face your own internalized racism, right? Like you're like, oh, you're that kind of Hmong person, or like, oh, you're that kind of Asian. And like, I know like my friends would be like, oh, that Japanese guy's so hot. And I'm like, okay, well, what about the Hmong guy? They're like, oh, Hmong guys are so ugly. So it's kind of like, you really can't win when you're a person of color. And so when I joined Hmong Innovating Politics, I was like, oh, wow, like I meet so many Hmong people who are so passionate about their community. And I feel like being passionate or having pride in who you are is always so shunned upon. And so when I first stepped into that area, I was like, wow, this is where I want to be. This is the youth I want to work with. This is the community I want to serve. And if I had not been provided those opportunities, I'm not sure where I would be today, but I definitely feel like those provided me grace to be who I was and embrace who I wanted to be.
Wow, thank you so much. And you know, it's very, when I hear you all speak, we talk about representation, and the hope is that everyone, even as an educator within the school, when my kids come to our school, I want them to be proud of who they are. Come to us with who they are, every part of who they are, right? And we know through research and science that there are 3 critical factors that contribute to our identity, who we become as adults, and that's experiences, relationships, and environment. And so how do we create those experiences, those relationships, that environment that allow us as individual people to be proud of who we are and bring our assets to the spaces that we encounter. And so I appreciate the perspective of all of those things. When I hear you all speak, you know, I think of the pandemic and how we really have an opportunity to rethink and reimagine education. It's opened our eyes to inequities and opened our eyes to a lot of different things. And I think for many people, we've known that they've existed, but this idea of hope, right? Helping open people's eyes about the issues that are around us. And so as we move into reimagining education, rewriting that history, you know, rewriting what the next generation will receive as their educational opportunities, what youth-led projects in our schools and communities, as we think about what we can do within our schools and our communities, can support providing equity, and meaning ensuring that our kids have what they need to be successful in our schools, and access, meaning that they have opportunities to participate in things that, like a leadership course. There's not an application to be in leadership. We are all leaders in our own right. How can we create an opportunity to be in a leadership course? Or there is not a summer working program that you have to participate in because you want to go to AP. There's some AP prerequisite. Well, I work over the summer. I still smart enough to be an AP, but how can we rewrite some of these or change some of these things that we see within education, and create projects and opportunities within our communities to support equity and access? So how can we support equity and access in school from your perspective? Why don't you kick us off, Elizabeth?
I'm still trying to think of an answer.
No problem. It's all
But
good.
it's a hard question, so I'm still trying to gather my thoughts.
There you go.
Yeah, in case anyone wants to go before me, or I can just try to speak my thoughts right now.
No, you're good. Take your time. Take your time. And I'll give you guys a few minutes to really think about that, right? So as we're thinking about schooling and you're thinking about your own experiences, what in school would have helped your experiences be greater, right? What are things or barriers that were present in your current school experience? And what can we do as a community to remove some of those barriers for other people within the school system currently? So right now we see things for kids where they don't have access to certain opportunities. We can look at data and see that disproportionately we see students of color being overrepresented in suspension data. We may see students with disabilities overrepresented in these statistics as well. But what barriers can we do, or what things can we do to remove those barriers for certain groups of students? And even in your own space, in your own community, as who you are as a person, an individual, what barriers may have existed that you can think of, or something that could have happened to help you remove some of those barriers? So we'll give you some time to think about that. And as you all are listening on, we thank you again for being here, and we appreciate you being able to engage in this dialogue with us. But after this question, we'll have an opportunity for people from the audience or those who are watching in to ask any questions of any of our panelists or anyone on the screen, right? And just type your questions in the chat, and we'll have time, an opportunity for that. So we'll turn it over back to the panelists. Got your answer, Elizabeth?
Yeah, I think I'm
All
good.
right, cool. There you go.
Okay. So I think the biggest thing, at least for higher education, which is what I'm currently finishing as an undergrad, I think we need to help our youth, specifically our BIPOC communities, with career preparedness. I think helping certain students to really prepare for their career, I think that's what we need to be doing more of. I don't think as a Fresno State student, I have seen much effort toward that. So I think really expanding those programs that we currently do have across the university would be great. I know we do have small programs, but I think expanding those throughout universities would really help students prepare for their career, instead of waiting for them to graduate and then, hey, here's a send-off, here's some things that you can do to get a job. I think we need to really prepare our youth to tackle on their careers. Another big thing that I think we also need to address is technology disparity. I think the pandemic has really shown a disparity, especially with students of color not having access to the internet, or not having the proper laptops necessary to fulfill either lockdown browser or whatever your professor is requiring you to use. I think that's something that we need to really acknowledge, but also not let go of after we go back to normal. I think we need to really take that data that has been found and really decrease that disparity and address that, and not allow any student to go without having a laptop or having internet when they go home. I think we need to really secure that for our students. And lastly, I think creating opportunities, that's something that I really care about. And I do currently serve as a representative for Fresno State, the student body. But last year, when I also served, I was able to create a program for students to engage with lobbying and to go to the Capitol and meet our representatives. I was able to create that as a vice president for students. And I think that's what we need to be doing, really trusting our youth. I think that's what we need to do. And in that program that I was able to create, I took students to the Capitol that have never seen the Capitol, that have never gone to Sacramento, that have never even knew who their representative was. And I think that's what changes people's sense of belonging, but also that's what changes a university to actually be inclusive and taking their students to these opportunities that they take on and remember forever. So that's what I think we need to be doing more of, just really trusting the youth, and also just realizing that if we want to talk about diversity and inclusion, they're two separate things, and we need to really come together to address both of them uniquely and bring these students to the table, not just let everything be, I guess, concluded by a white man, again, like every other dominant space. I think that's what we need to really address as well. But I think those are a couple of things that I would like to see really gain traction.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Appreciate the response. Anyone else? I don't want to throw you on the spot unless you have an answer, but anyone else, any thoughts about this topic?
I'll go.
Ayanna, go ahead, Odessa.
Just real fast. Just focusing on equity and access. I think that access is like one of the most important things that we need to focus on, just because I'm not going to say that, people of color are not offered the same opportunities, but we are 100% not offered the same access to these opportunities. So I think that that is one of the main things we need to focus on. We need to make sure that people of color are, receiving the same information as everybody else, and then some, because of, we need to compensate for the lack of information in the past. So that's all.
Thank you. Ayanna, you had a comment? You raised your hand?
Yes, when you're talking about eliminating barriers and how to bring equity and access to students, and I'm just speaking from a high school level of education, I think it's important to first, like I said, have students in more student-led voice projects. And I think it's also important to erase the stigma that maybe that you have to be a straight A student, or have to be a super smart person in order to participate and voice needs of like your peers and yourself. So because like for myself, for example, I'm not embarrassed to say that I'm not a straight A student, and past me would have never thought I would be even allowed to join any kind of leadership groups or go to meetings where I could say, hey, I think this is not okay, or collaborate with my peers. So I think the stigma that I think it's just important to let students know that it's okay to not be, don't know how to word it. You don't have to be some super smart 4.0 GPA to have your voice heard. It doesn't mean you're any less deserving. And I just think that's important. And that's really the thought that stuck out to me the most.
100%. Definitely don't have to fit into the box or the stereotype to have your voice heard. Everyone should have that opportunity to, and to Odessa's point, right? How do we create access to understanding what's available to us in our spaces, and making sure that we truly have access to not just participate, but to fully participate and know the resources and know the information and have the awareness of what's there and present, and really get to learn about those things. Belle, what's your thought about this topic?
Yeah, thank you for creating space.
Yeah.
Before I start with my conversation, I want to give a shout out to my mom. She's incredible, and she has to do with the story, which is why I'm not just doing some random shout out.
Yeah.
But I think something really important is free lunch, right? I remember when I was like a third grader at a Clovis Unified School, I didn't have enough money. My mom was usually on top of it, but I don't remember what happened. But I think I forgot the money on the bed, and so they didn't give me lunch. And I remember just being this only kid of color sitting there eating nothing, while all like my white friends were kind of like teasing me about not having lunch. And I remember going home crying that day for the first time, like dealing with feeling like an outcast. And maybe there are layers to that of racism as well. But yeah, free lunch is so important. Like, just, it also really applies to communities of color too, because oftentimes people that don't get the free lunches are children of color, because they have those stereotypes that are applied upon them. And if we can invest billions of dollars into a military and cops, we can definitely invest those millions back into our communities with those youth who need that food to fuel themselves. And sometimes for some youth, that's the only food they get for the day, which is really important to provide those free lunches. And that's something I feel would be very simple to incorporate within the education system. Another thing is extracurricular, like music and arts. You'll notice that music and arts, the schools that get music and arts cut out first are always communities of color, low-income families, always. And music and arts is truly a way for children to express themselves and find out who they really want to be, and love something outside of their own home. And by not providing those through education as well, it really diminishes the experience of their education, and it discourages them to pursuing and continuing their education. And those two things I feel like are so simple, but are things that are always cut from communities of color first.
As you all, thank you so much, Belle. As you all kind of continue, I want to raise one of the questions in the chat, and it really connects to what we've been talking about. We've been talking about cultural identity representation, really learning and understanding about our culture and our history, and helping other people do the same. And there has been a lot of conversation and controversy around ethnic studies. And one of the questions in the chat is how the state of California ethnic study curriculum might change things as we move forward in the universities and high schools. So for those of you who don't know, there has passed that the universities, or at least I believe it's California State Universities, will have ethnic studies as a graduation requirement. And anyone correct me if I'm wrong, but there's also a petition and proposal to do the same in our high school courses, that it becomes an A3G graduation requirement. And it'll require students to take ethnic studies class as a A through G high school graduation requirement. So, should this be included, and how might this change things as we move forward in high school and in college? And anyone can start.
I'll start. I think that this curriculum is like essential because, like I was saying earlier, we need to make sure that these conversations are being had in school, in class. And I know that these courses, I think, are just electives right now. Like you can choose whether or not you take them, but I think this needs to be something that is an A through G requirement. We need to make sure that these conversations are, not seen as too uncomfortable to have in school, or too political to be had in schools. And I just think that the curriculum is like the first step to integrating these very real, raw kind of conversations into our classrooms. So I think that it's just like the first step to, many to come.
And what are you guys' thoughts? How do you think this may impact, our school system, having these courses in our schools?
I can go. I know like the bill language really makes it only focus on, I think, 4 categories. I can't remember the ones that they'll be focusing on specifically. So I think really moving toward expanding that bill to include other ethnicities and racial groups would be a good start to ensuring that we are really focusing on the community surrounding us. I think the biggest thing that I look forward to with these courses as an ethnic studies major myself with Chicano and American studies. I think these courses will really, again, allow a space for people to learn, but also for people to listen and to engage in these important conversations about race, about one's ethnicity. I think that's what we really need to be doing in our curriculum. And I know that this will be a graduation requirement. So every single student going to college, at least in the CSU system, will have to take an ethnic studies course. And I think that's something that we, that's a great start. But again, there's more that we can definitely do. But yeah, I know our Secretary of State, Shirley Weber, is the one who authored this bill. So definitely a great props to her for doing this.
Definitely exciting. Any other thoughts on that topic? We do have a few other questions, and you can answer that question, or we have a few others, and I'm going to put in the chat a link to those questions. And so what I want our panelists to do is really take a look at any of those questions. I'll give you a few seconds to do that, but I will pose one of these questions because it goes into our discussion about reimagining or reshifting this conversation about race where it's not uncomfortable, right? It's uncomfortable because of the historical context of this word and what it was designed to do, which was basically to divide individuals based on characteristics, to devalue humanity in a sense of inferiority and superiority, right? And so one of the questions is, in what way would what would be a good way to reform society and basically erase these stereotypes? Or as I would put it, how could we recreate the definition of race? If it was once created, well, can we recreate it, right? And what would that look like? So I want to bring that up to the group. Thoughts on that?
I'd like to make a quick comment about the AB 1460.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I want to say I'm thrilled that AB 1460 has passed. I know, like, I've heard a lot of comments from peers who are like, oh, I don't want to take an extra class. But the thing is, the AB 1460, it just has to be a class within the 120 units that you are required to graduate. So it's not going to be extra curriculum on top of that. And I feel like this is so important because it's going to create proper funding for the ethnic studies program. And some of my greatest mentors are from Asian American studies and American Indian studies and Chicano studies. Like, they're amazing. And I know I have witnessed as a student them being exploited like crazy. Like, I see them make classes that, like, they've made like 8 classes, which is unheard of for faculty. And I just watch them being abused by the system over and over again and tokenized. And now that they're going to have proper funding to encourage like entire staff and faculty to properly support them, I'm really excited about that. And I feel like the quality of it's already great. And now that they have proper funding and support through the CSU system, they're going to just excel from here and change even more students' lives. And I feel like that's crucial in this experience of being a student and witnessing, if they're already amazing now by the way they're being treated, imagine how more amazing they're going to be once this is actually implemented. And it doesn't really change the students' curriculum. Like, it's, in my opinion, it's so easy. But again, I'm also an Asian American Studies minor, because you're required to take a writing class. You can make that an ethnic studies writing class, right? That's something you're passionate about. You have to take so many GEs. Like, there's so many that fit within the GE system. Like, you can just do that. Like, I feel like it's going to be an asset to the future, and it's definitely going to change the perspective of community members, especially being a business major. When I first started, the first 3 years of my school year, I was only a business major. And once I took ethnic studies, it exposed me to an entirely new world that I would have never had the opportunity. Right now, I'm actually recently got hired full time, and that's within an Asian CBO sector, which is something I would never have considered if I had not pursued those opportunities through the GEs that introduced me to this entire new world that I would never have been exposed to again, if not for ethnic studies. So I know I could totally.
No, that's great. Thank you for sharing. I'm glad you did, because those experiences are so important, and it came directly from having an opportunity to participate in ethnic studies. So thank you. So I know someone wanted to jump in. I forgot who it was into that last question, but there are questions on that chat. And so click on that link and you can see those questions. But the one question that we proposed or wanted to uplift before is how do we rewrite this socially constructed meaning of race?
I want to go first on this question. I love this question. I always talk about this. It's just my favorite thing to talk about. But I think one of the biggest things that we need to reform to erase the stereotypes for the younger generation is the media. You know, like you guys, you know, we watched like Disney movies growing up, and like a lot of them have like some really racist, very horrible characters, like caricatures, you know, maybe like minstrel type characters that are often portrayed by either people of color or people of the LGBTQ community. And so what we consume as young people is what we become as people that grow up. And so if we're consuming things that are biased and a little bit racist, then obviously we're going to internalize those things, and it's going to translate into our communities, whether or not it's the Black community or the Asian community or the Indigenous community. It's going to translate into our communities. So we can't, you know, show our youth these things and then wonder why they're not changing in the future. So we have to start very, very young, because these are children's movies. This is the age that we're being exposed to these, you know, racist ideas. So we have to start very young, just dismantling those things. And I think that it's going to come strictly from the media, just because that's all we watch. It's all we consume. All the music, all the movies, all the YouTube channels that kids love to watch, all of it. That's what's going to shift, you know, that perception for the younger generation. And then that's, you know, what they consume now is what's going to translate later into the future.
Wow. Odessa, man, preach. I'll tell you, like, I think about my daughter recently, and I want to share this quick story. It was Black History Month, and my kids were talking about what they were learning in school. And my daughter, of course, learned about Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King. And I was explaining to my children as we were on a walk that, you know, well, do you know that Black people had a history before they were brought to this country? They did some amazing different things in where they were from, and they were scientists and, you know, mathematicians and some of the smartest people in the world. And my daughter looks up at me and says, well, does that mean I'm smart too? And it broke my heart, only because, like, I realized that no matter how much I tell her how beautiful, how smart, how great, how brave, how strong she is, I'm her father, right? I'm supposed to tell her these things. Society and media tell her something different. And without the opportunities for her to see herself in media or in society or in books, right, in a different light, it may even cause her to have this psychological belief about what she's capable of becoming and what she could be. And I only recognize that because she loves math. She wants to be a scientist. She struggles in math, and she doesn't see very many women who lead math. So the first movie I grabbed is Hidden Figures, and I want to show her this movie and like run with it, right? And now she couldn't stop imagining different things, right? So what we only can imagine, we can become when we see ourselves in a different light. So thank you so much for bringing that up, Odessa, because you hit a great point. What we see is really what we become. Any other thoughts about that question, or any questions in the chat? We're getting close in time. I could spend the whole rest of the day talking to you, but I want to throw it out for one last comment or thoughts before we wrap up here this afternoon.
I just want to quickly add that a good way, I think, in order to reform society and get rid of stereotypes is, I think it's just important to learn about each other's cultures and just have an open mind. And I just really think that learning about each other and is just the best way, because when I feel like when you learn something, even if you wanted to or not, it's gonna stick. And that's all I can think of on what I just want to say. I think it's very important to learn each other and then learn about each other and appreciate everyone's differences. And in appreciating other people's differences, you will see the connections.
For sure, for sure. Thank you. Any other last thought?
Yes,
We
I'd
have.
like to I
Go
like to
ahead.
echo what Odessa said too. I think it's really interesting that you consider Disney part of media, and it is, because like I know one of my favorite Disney princesses is Princess and the Frog, which is Princess Tiana, and I recently read an article like how come she's the only Black princess and like 90% of the movie she's a frog, and I'm like I never thought about it like that, and how like we don't consider that. And I know like Raya and the Last Dragon just recently came out, and people like I was mad about it because like they hired Aquafina, who's an Eastern Asian, and they portrayed her as a Southeast Asian. So like the controversy that happens in Disney, and Disney said that they hired Aquafina because they needed more traction. Like it would be better for marketing. And I'm like, y'all Disney, you can hire whoever you want. People will still watch it. So like the excuses that come with race when it comes to Disney too, I think that's really interesting.
Any other thoughts? I don't want to cut anybody off. And so what I will say is that we're on here. I know we're supposed to end at 4:45 and it is 4:45. If you want to continue to ask questions or answer questions, please feel free to do so. For those of you who are watching, we're going to stick around because I want to give these young leaders an opportunity to finish sharing their voice because I think it's so important and so powerful. So just know we'll stick around, but if you have to jump off, we thank you all for being here, and we so appreciate this opportunity from the Civic Education Center and Fresno State for putting this on for our youth, and hopefully we can create many more opportunities and bring more people into the conversation. But again, thank you for being here. If you could stick around, I will let our youth leaders kind of answer any other questions or share any other thoughts before we close out.
I just want to say thank you again for allowing this space to exist, I guess. I think this is what we really need to really change the way society is in these conversations about race and inclusion, and just really having these important questions being answered. I think that's what we really need to have. So just thank you for allowing me to be a panelist.
Thank you for being here. I do want to uplift a quote from President Obama, and it's in one of the questions, but it says, "Our Constitution is a remarkable, beautiful gift that our founders gave us, and that the long sweep of America has been defined by a constant widening of our founding creed to embrace all and not just some." And so, I want us to think about that. What do we think? Do we agree with that? You can just put a thumbs up in the chat if you do, because I think it's important for us to remind ourselves of the American history, right? And not to run from it, but to acknowledge it, to understand it, and to either live up to it or help create the changes that are necessary for us to live up to it. And so as we continue to engage in dialogue around these very important topics, I do want to remind us that we have our children recite something every single day. And it's called the Pledge of Allegiance. And in our Pledge of Allegiance, we say something that is very poignant: with liberty and justice for all. So I would contend that it is our responsibility to ensure that we live up to those words and we continue to fight for liberty and justice for all. So this is going to conclude our panel discussion. I want to thank our panelists, all of you. You are brilliant young minds for participating in today's dialogue, and everyone who joined in, who's watching remotely. We appreciate you all. And a special thanks again to our youth panelists for uplifting and sharing their voice and making their voice heard. And in the words of the late great civil rights leader, Senator John Lewis, every generation leaves behind a legacy. What that legacy will be is determined by the people of that generation. So I want to thank you all for leading your generation and leaving behind a legacy. So continue the great work, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much, Brandon, for moderating. Panelists, I don't know if you guys are off mute, but I just want to give you a huge round of applause. I know we're getting silent claps, but I am so incredibly proud of you guys. The Civic Education Center and the Ethics Center at Fresno State are so grateful that you guys decided to accept this opportunity, and we welcome you into this space. And without you, change does not occur. Without conversations like these, we can't move forward. I was educated today. I'm sure teachers, peers, everyone that participated in today's dialogue learned something today. And that's what we're pushing for. That's what we're here to do. And I just want to really thank you guys so much for just being a part of this and taking the time to contribute to this difficult conversation. But what we realized today is it's not that difficult, right? We found common ground today. We discussed issues. We talked about things, how we can move forward. We realized that race is defined, but we have the position and the opportunity to redefine it. All we have to do is change our minds and change the conversation. And that's what we did today. And I am so incredibly honored and proud to be here as the coordinator for the Civic Education Center. I welcome you all to continue to follow us. Our website is www.civicedcenter.org. You can hear about upcoming events, future web dialogues that we will continue to do, because you guys, your voice is everything, and it matters, and it provokes change, as you can see from the questions and the amazing participants. Everyone here they loved it, and we're just thankful for you guys. I definitely again want to give a huge shout out to Belle and Andy Fiala from Fresno State Ethics Center for helping us put this together, and Mr. Gridiron for just lending his voice, and again to Ayanna, Belle, Anthony, Elizabeth, and Odessa for being here. Thank you guys so much. I would like to introduce the CEO and COO of the Civic Education Center, Dr. Stephen Morris and Dr. John Minkler, to close us out and just say hello and give any words that they would like to give before we close out.
Thank you. Let me go next and let Dr. Morris close it. I'm so pleased and grateful that we invited Youth Voice to share your real experiences and your ideas about how we can address this issue. I agree with the Obama quote that in our history, we've had a very gradual expansion of liberty and justice, but I feel like there's a potential for a rapid expansion. I think we're ready for that. And I think the way that could happen is by empowering young people to have more of a voice in their schools through the democratic process and through their classes and through clubs. And that's what our Civic Education Center is committed to. So this just is really inspiring to hear the depth of knowledge and compassion that young people have. And thank you to all who made it happen.
I want to echo the sentiments of Dr. Minkler, and you guys are just, wow, just blew me away. So much of our civil rights movement was 12-year-olds and 10-year-olds in marches, facing down dogs, police, pepper spray, but they marched because they believed that something different would happen in the future. And when I hear you guys speak, I hear that voice once again, talking of the future, of the hope we can have. So thank you all for being here and sharing that voice and putting power in it. We will see change. Thank you.